What's up, everyone? Welcome to this day in Philly Sports History for February 8th, 2024. I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. Welcome to Trade Deadline Thursday. So many different rumors and ways the Sixers could go out there. We'll keep an eye on it all day, and we'll have an update tomorrow. Like I said, I have no idea which way they're going to go, but we'll get more into that in a moment. But first, as always, let's recap yesterday's question of the day. I decided to have a little bit of fun. What is the greatest football movie ever made? And you guys were all over the place with that. I totally appreciate it. And I gave you the options of Remember the Titans, Any Given Sunday, Rudy, or Friday Night Lights. Of those four, 80% said Remember the Titans, 20% Friday Night Lights, no love for Rudy or Any Given Sunday. However, we did have a ton of write-ins, including The Waterboy, which I left off, The Program. The Replacements was brought up a few times, and that's an interesting, intriguing movie. And I think it's an underrated movie, to be honest, because it's semi-based on a true story. When the NFL went on strike in 1987 then had some replacement players, and then the NFL players, some of them crossed the picket line and everything. However, some of those guys, I think a handful of guys did manage to latch on with teams after the strike was over. But it was I enjoyed it with Keanu Reeves and Gene Hackman, and Jon Favreau was in that. So lots of good actors in there. A pretty decent one. Invincible was brought up, and I got called out on not putting Invincible on the list, and this being a Philly sports-based podcast. And it was tough, but to me, Invincible does not stack up against Remember the Titans or Any Given Sunday or Friday Night Lights. Maybe I could put it in there over Rudy. I'm not a Notre Dame guy. I know the Notre Dame faction of the crowd out there. It's probably driving off the road or throwing things at their computer right now, but I didn't put Invincible on. Little Giants, Varsity Blues, both longest yards made the cut. Draft Day, which is another underrated one, which I always forget about. It definitely was a good look, and really, I kind of see Howie Roseman as the Kevin Costner role almost in that movie. But as always, thank you. A lot of fun doing that, and I don't think you can go wrong. It's hard to make a bad football movie. I'm sure some of you could argue that some of the names on the list are bad, but as always, thanks for participating. 267-495-8531. Get you into the voice and text line. But for my money, nothing will top Remember the Titans. All right. Be sure to like the YouTube channel and subscribe. Trying to grow this thing. I had a meeting last night. Doing some things with the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame. I have some things lined up for next week, but all of it is dependent upon the algorithm and things like that. And the more subscribers I have, the better. And again, I know you're out there because I can see the analytics. So just go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Even if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, just go subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you don't have a YouTube channel or a YouTube account, make one up and then subscribe, and then you don't even have to deal with it. Time is also starting to tick away. We have a few more weeks left of the Girl Scout cookie sale. Go check out everything you need in the link. At this point, you're out of your first round. Why not get your second round from Ella? Help her out. Everything you need is in the description for that. I mentioned working with the Hall of Fame, just trying to volunteer and get in and just be a part of that, because I think it's a natural fit based on what I do on this podcast. We talked about the ballot last night, so it should be another solid class this year. But as more details are available for that, I'll get them out to you. But that's a little teaser for what's going on. Flyers are in action tonight at home against the Winnipeg Jets. Looking to build on that momentum that they started coming out of the All-Star break with the win over Florida. They're currently, as of last night, I didn't take into account any games that happened last night, but they were in a 3 or 4 way tie for that final wild card spot in the East. The Jets are a tough defensive team. They are actually in their top 3 in their division, so it should be a decent game tonight. Good measuring stick game. And like we had said before this, or before the All-Star break happened, they were in that stretch where they were playing a ton of playoff or teams that were in the playoffs. So this is, again, another test for a young team. And we need to see where we are and what we have going on with them. But looking forward to this one tonight. It should be a good one. I mentioned the trade deadline. Before we talk about the trade deadline, the game last night, 127 to 104. They're just a completely different team without Joe, and they're inconsistent. They can't play a full 48 minutes is what the problem is, and it's starting to become somewhat concerning to me that they play so poorly without Joe. I'm specifically looking at Tyrese Maxey, and if he's really the guy that we've pumped him up and want to make him a superstar, then he needs to really take over a game and carry the team. And he's been struggling with that. Maybe he's still hurting with it, the ankle injury, but they've now lost 7 of 8 and it's completely spiraling out of control. A la the Eagles at the end of their season. One bright spot yesterday, Jaden Springer. Whenever he gets to play on extended minutes and for an extended time, he always does well. So hopefully he's going to be a piece that this team can build around in the future as they go and try to figure out what's going on. Because truthfully, next year after the season, they really will only have they're like 2 or 3 guys under contract, and that's if they re-sign Maxey to the max deal. So, I mean, one way to look at this trade deadline is let's try to go after it this year. But another thing is how can they set themselves up to be successful for next year moving forward? Some of the names that have been floated around like Korkmaz, Marcus Smart, and Covington are probably going to be on the move. And I do think with some of those expiring contracts, you need to try to get what you can for them. I 2-3 weeks ago, I would have said hang on to Tobias. But if a team out there wants somebody like Tobias, I think because of his expiring contract, as long as you're not bringing on anything ridiculous or out of control, I would do it at this point and just almost punt on this year. And I know they'll never come right out and say that out loud. But, I mean, the guys are looking at Kelly Olynyk. It doesn't really do much for me. One name, though, that is intriguing to me that I've always had my eye on, and he's been linked to the Sixers since he came out in the draft, is Buddy Hield. He's also on an expiring contract, so if they could somehow bring him in and then convince him to re-sign, it'd be a good way to see maybe how he can play with Maxey. I just feel that Sixers need somebody that can just spot up and shoot like Buddy Hield. They haven't had that really since they got rid of J.J. Redick. I know Curry was here. Seth Curry was here, and he was sort of that guy. But that's the guy I like and need for this team. And I think that would help out Maxey's game because, yes, Maxey can shoot, but Maxey's sort of a dasher and a driver. So if he can drive and kick out, that's going to open up more. And I don't know. I mean, I look at who knows. But if they could bring him in here, I don't know how much it would mean for this year. But if they bring him in here and can re-sign him, then he's like 29, 30. So he's around the same age as Joe. And I don't know. I've always wanted him to be the guy, but I guess apparently Indiana is not interested in what the Sixers have to offer, so it might have to be a 3-way trade. So lots going to happen today. I'll definitely have my Twitter up and be refreshing a lot. But hopefully we'll have some news on the Sixers trade deadline pickups tomorrow. All right, we are less than a week away from pitchers and catchers, so we do have some Phillies news. And Dave Dombroski was on WIP yesterday and kind of said some things, and it was nice to hear sort of his perspective because ultimately a lot of people are saying, oh, they're like nervous that the Phillies didn't make a big splash and were kind of quiet in the offseason. And he addressed that, and I'll get into that in a minute. But some of the other highlights from the interview, If you remember, we were talking about the Yamamoto trade and or signing and what the Sixers or the Phillies needed to do for that. And apparently they were aggressive. He didn't release how much they offered, but there was just nothing they could do because he wanted to play for the Dodgers. And I mean, that kind of is what it is. So, I mean, it's good to see, though, that they were aggressive and trying to sign him. He did reiterate that it was Rojas's job to lose the center field position, and he's given young players a chance. Guys like Rojas, Orion Corcoran, Christopher Sanchez, guys that are going to have a chance to contribute. And ultimately, in baseball, more so than any other sport, maybe the NFL, that's kind of what you want. You have to have a good balance of stars and then young guys that come along. And so we have Bryson Stott that's really come into his own. They were able to trade for Brandon Marsh. I look for him to have a bigger season. So having that good mix, I think is good. And they're really hoping that Kirkering could be the closer. Sanchez definitely is the fifth starter. And I mean, I was high on him last year. So I like that they're giving these guys, and that's what you build your farm system up for, is to fill in spots like this with young guys that have relatively cheap contracts, so you can go out and sign a guy like Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, re-sign Aaron Nola, re-sign Zach Wheeler, and make those types of moves. So I really like that that's sort of their mindset and where they're going. He did address Andrew Painter. He will not be pitching at all this year. He will be ready to go for 2025. He's starting to toss. He does, speaking of Zach Wheeler, he does want to extend him. So we'll see if they can get that done during the season. I know at some point last year, I don't know whether it was the Phillies or Aaron Nola said we're not going to do any negotiation during the season. Hopefully something with Zach Wheeler can get done. But the truth of the matter is, he said we were quiet, not necessarily inactive, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they did sign Nola, and I think there's a lot of people that were like, oh, well, Nola's inconsistent. He's this, he's that. But I go back to, who would you have brought in instead of Aaron Nola? And that's, I guess, the $1 million question, because what they paid for Nola likely would have been the going rate for somebody who probably has the same question marks as Nola. So I'm fine with that, and I think that as being your key piece to the offseason isn't a bad thing. But I think what you need to keep in mind, and I think we all tend to forget because we've taken it for granted over the past 2 years, this year they have probably one of the top 5 or top 10 starting pitching staffs in the league. They also have one of the top 5 or 10 lineups in the league. And so you have a good team that you're bringing back. And they didn't necessarily add pieces, but you're going to have Bryce Harper coming out of the gates healthy. He's going to have a position. We haven't had that since really, I guess, 2022. But then he missed that big stretch in 2022 when he got hit in the hand. So, and he hurt his elbow early in 22. So the fact that we have Bryce Harper coming in healthy, that's huge. Trey Turner got his sea legs under him near the end of last year. He's not coming off the World Baseball Classic. He's going to be comfortable in Philly. That's huge. And again, you have the lineup. You have Brandon Marsh knowing he's going to be the starting left fielder. You have Rojas knowing, okay, it's my job to lose. Just go out and do your thing because he's been working hard. So I think a lot of those, I guess, intangible things you could call them that we didn't have last year will play a role in this team. And I'll get more into that when we start doing our Phillies preview. But I really think, if you think about it, last year they kind of floundered, and it wasn't until about June or July that the Phillies really started to turn it on. And from June or July on, they were like one of the top 3 teams in all of baseball as far as the record and things like that. So having that to start the season is I feel it's being overlooked by a lot of people, and even a lot of people on the radio. They're saying, and again, it's the media, so you take it with a grain of salt. But those guys are out there saying that, like, hey, the Phillies were quiet, blah, 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 this and that. And I'm like, it's okay that they were quiet. They weren't inactive. They were just quiet. And I think having those guys to start the season and some of those mental things that you dealt with last year, like you're basically, your rotation is set. You know what the rotation is. You know that you have your first baseman. You have your lineup for the most part set. You're going to be battling out for bench positions, and that's okay. Now, if somebody becomes available that you can make the team better, absolutely you do it. But that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. I think just having more stability is probably going to be a good thing for this team, and it's going to allow them to focus on what they need to do. And again, I'm very bullish on the Phillies this year. I think a lot of those things I mentioned, and I'll get more into that later, either this month or in March when we do our Phillies preview, but I'm high on them, even with what they did in the offseason. But that leads to today's question of the day. How would you grade the Phillies offseason? A, B, C, F? Let me know what you think. 267-495-8531. 267-495-8531. Get you through on the voice and text line. Let me know what you think. How would you grade the Phillies offseason? And am I missing something that maybe I'm drinking the red Kool-Aid today instead of the green? Let me know. But I believe in this. I don't know. I'm high on this team. I believe. I'm going to be getting a Believe shirt so I can be like Johan Rojas. Hopefully I can get the 19-inch Pythons. But go to PhillyGoat.com. They have you covered for all of your Philly sports apparel needs, Philly-centric. They have the Philly Pride stuff. They have Philly Neighborhood, just Rocky, boxing, you name it, they got it. They even got shoes, man. I'm telling you, these shoes are incredible. I cannot wait to buy like one of every pair. So go to PhillyGoat.com, check them out. When you go to the checkout, use the promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off your order. That's PhillyGoat.com, promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off your order, and you gotta believe. All right, Eagles news. Very quiet on the Eagles front, but I came across this the other day and just haven't been able to fit it in. So I figured it was a good day today. But Asante Samuel was interviewed, and something came up about his Eagles days, and he was asked about Andy Reid, Donovan McNabb, and just what was going on here. And he flat out said there was a lack of effort and accountability on both of them. He gave an example at a practice when McNabb underthrew somebody and it was just kind of like brushed off, where he compared it to when he was in New England, and Bill Belichick would be like, you keep practicing this play until you get it right. Almost kind of like, and we talked about Remember the Titans, almost like Coach Boone in Remember the Titans, where he's like, we will be perfect in every aspect. He didn't see that with the Eagles. And that, to me, was very eye-opening. And they weren't crisp. And instead of running it until they got it right, it was just sort of brushed off, which if you think about McNabb's career, one of the things against him, he threw an awesome deep ball, but he could not hit a receiver on a short route to save his life, constantly throwing it low. And apparently it stemmed back from practice. And because Andy Reid let it go, it bothered Asante, so he went to Andy Reid, and Andy Reid flat out told him, Asante, it's your job to discipline and reprimand the players. And Asante Samuel was just floored by that. But again, like, think back to Donovan's career and just ultimately all of his shortcomings were basically coddled and encouraged almost by Andy Reid. Samuel flat out said, he was like, they would have won more Super Bowls if he held Donovan accountable, applied more discipline to him, and didn't treat him like a baby. And I mean, I think if you even look at the Terrell Owens situation, the fact that Andy Reid sort of let that go out of control. And the only reason I'm bringing this up, and I think it's very relevant here on Super Bowl week, is because everybody's saying, oh, maybe the Eagles shouldn't have gotten rid of Andy Reid. But maybe it was time to go, because Asante was there near the end of Andy's tenure. So maybe he was different in the beginning. However, it doesn't matter if you're near like a 5-year, 8-year veteran. I mean, that was a shortcoming of McNabb his entire career, and apparently it was not addressed in practice. So just something to me that was very eye-opening. And the fact that he said didn't hold him accountable, didn't discipline him, and treated him like a baby were his quotes. I think that, to me, that quote, I'll read it again. Reed would have won more Super Bowls if he had held him accountable and applied more discipline and treated him like a baby. Or didn't treat him like a baby. Like, that to me sums up Andy Reid's tenure in Philadelphia. And for all the national people out there who are saying, oh, they ran Andy Reid out of town, that's why it was time for Andy Reid to go. When you're just sitting at work today, go check out my boys over at the Clashing Conferences podcast. New episode dropped last night. Anywhere you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. I can't wait to hear what they have previewing the Super Bowl, especially because the Eagles, my cousin Greg, the Eagles guy, could not make it last night. So it looks like there's a 49ers fan filling in for him. So that we're still on Deebo Samuel's mind. So I'm really anxious to see what the fan has to say. But go check them out, the Clashing Conferences podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. All right, today we are going to go back to 1988. And on this day in 1988, I'll preface this with saying this seems like light years ago based on what's happening now. And this is 1988, so it wasn't that long ago. Temple was ranked the number one team in the AP poll that was released on this day back in 1988. Yes, the Temple Owls were ranked number one. They were 18-1 at that point. They jumped up from the number 5 spot when 13 out of the top 20 teams lost. It was a spot that Temple really, though, cherished and held on to. They would go into the tournament ranked number one. They were a number one seed in the East. They had won 13 straight then after being ranked number one, before ultimately falling to the Duke Blue Devils and Coach K in the regional final, 63-53. They went 32-2 that year, 18-0 in the A10. Their only other loss that year was to UNLV in Las Vegas by a point in a controversial ending, no less, or else they would have been 33-1. And who knows, maybe that changes the outlook of the season. But that was a loaded team. They had Mark Macon, Tim Perry, Ramon Rivas, Dwayne Caldwell, who all played in the NBA. Mike Vrieswick, who, speaking of a sharpshooter, when he got hot, he was hot. And Howard Evans. So they were a great team. And this is probably John Chaney's best shot to get to the Final Four from a standpoint of how far they went and the way the bracket fell. To me, it's either this team or the 2000 team that was the number 2 seed that got upset by Seton Hall in the second round up in Buffalo. But we don't need to talk about that because, believe it or not, I know for some of you young listeners out there, Temple basketball used to be good. It used to be one of the more elite teams in the country. And, I mean, they're still probably – I haven't checked recently. They tend to fluctuate with St. John's, but they are at top 5 all-time in wins. But on this day in 1988, you could argue was the pinnacle of Temple basketball. The only time in school history they were ranked number 1. It was the first time in Big 5 history that a Big 5 school had been ranked number 1. So this is a big deal on this day in 1988 when that poll came out. And they held on to it until the very end. I guess they stopped doing the polls after the tournament. But they went into the tournament, the number 1 team in the country. But it was this day back in 1988 that John Chaney's Temple Owls at 18-1 took over the number 1 spot in the AP poll and held it then until the tournament started. All right, finally today we're going to go with our Philly Sports Black History Spotlight. And today we take a look at Deron Cherry, the Burlington County native from Palmyra High, who went to Rutgers. He played punter and safety while at Rutgers, 9 interceptions, 2 touchdowns. He was the 1979 team MVP, 1979-1980 All Big East. Out of college, Cherry was an undrafted free agent signed with the Kansas City Chiefs in 1981. Now, this is where the story gets good. He was cut in training camp, then re-signed before it was the final cuts, re-signed before the season actually started. Went on to be regarded as one of the best safeties to ever play. He was a 3-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time second-team All-Pro, 6-time Pro Bowler, the 1987 Whizzer White NFL Man of the Year. He's on the NFL's 1980s All-Decade team. He is in the Kansas City Chiefs Hall of Fame. Had 4 interceptions in a game. I felt like Al Bundy saying that. 4 interceptions in one game in 1985, tied with 20 other players for the NFL record for most interceptions in the game. We talked about this before, but if you're keeping score at home or forgot, D'Angelo Hall was the last one to do it in 2010. In 1995, he became part of a limited ownership group of the Jacksonville Jaguars, becoming the first minority owner in NFL history. Just one of the greatest to ever do it in the NFL, one of the greatest to ever come out of our area. Deron Cherry from Burlington County and Palmyra High is today's Black History Spotlight, starred with the Kansas City Chiefs and just contributed on the field, off the field, and just somebody that we should all look up to. So shout out to you, Deron Cherry, today's Philly Sports Black History Spotlight. On this day, 1988, the Temple Owls were ranked number 1 in the AP poll for the first time in school history and the first time in Philadelphia college basketball history. A team from Philly was ranked number 1. Let me know what you think, too, about the whole Asante Samuel quote and take on Donovan and Andy. It's an interesting, like I said, it's interesting knowing, excuse me, it's interesting knowing Donovan's weaknesses and how it apparently, according to Asante, was not addressed in practice by Andy. Be sure to let me know what your grade is for the Phillies offseason, 267-495-8531. I'm high on the Phillies this year. Excuse me. I think it's my heater. My heater is like right underneath my desk. So whenever the heat turns on, I feel like the dry air, it dries out my throat. But I apologize for that. Hopefully the Sixers, we have a better, clearer picture of what to expect for the rest of the season today. We'll have more on that tomorrow. Like and subscribe the YouTube channel, Jimbo_Mott. Buy your Girl Scout cookies from Ella. All the information is in the link in the description. But go have yourselves a Thursday. It's supposed to be another beautiful day in the area. Get out after work and go for a run, go for a walk, play some basketball, whatever you need to do. This has been This Day in Philly Sports History. I'm Jim Montgomery. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you.